The date is Friday, March 22nd of 1996. Thunder roars in the distance as you've just arrived at home from school. You walk into your room and you're greeted with a surprise sitting atop your bed. The bag decorated with a familiar logo you've seen before. EB Games, one of your favorite stores to shop at whenever your mom takes you on a trip to the mall. It's your birthday today, you have the whole weekend ahead of you, and now you've probably got a new game to play. In excitement, you open the bag, reaching inside. You feel the familiar touch of a case wrapped in plastic. You pull it out, reading the words, Resident Evil, and your mouth drops. You've read all about this game in the magazines, and now it's yours to play. The rain begins to come down a little harder now, each drop a melody on your window pane. The calm silence of your house and hums of the storm are met with the familiar sound of your PlayStation 1 being booted up. You insert the disc and begin to sit back on your favorite beanbag chair, bracing yourself to be changed forever. Life is good, and all that matters right now is the moment. The moment you stepped into the world of survival horror and never wanted to leave. The moment you became a Resident Evil fan.
Resident Evil.
If you're watching this video, then it's probably safe for me to assume that you're already a fan of the Resident Evil series. But in the case you've been living under a rock or have never played a video game before, maybe I can convince you to change your ways and give this incredible IP a chance to shine in your life. But for those who have already played through the many twists and turns of the Resident Evil universe, I'm not here to give y'all another rundown or review of each game. I'm here to dissect and analyze what exactly it is that makes these games so incredible as a collective. The Resident Evil universe is one of much complexity, and sometimes it's just purely confusing. But if there's one thing that's clear about this franchise, is that it's widely loved and greatly appreciated by fans all over the world. To this day, the Resident Evil IP is one of the longest running series in video gaming, sitting at 27 years and counting. And with this franchise selling over 135 million titles since the beginning of its journey, I think it's safe to say it's a solid gaming success story. But with so many other beloved series falling short in the poisonous air of modern gaming, how is it that Resident Evil manages to hold strong and continue pleasing its massive audience? Well, in this video, I'm looking to cover just that. So please, wish us luck and make sure to stock up on plenty of herbs as we dive into the world of survival horror once again. One of my first experiences in the world of Resident Evil was with its sequel, Resident Evil 2. I was about 5 years old at the time, and I remember being scared of the cover art that was displayed on the PS1 jewel case. Against my better judgment and sitting in a dark room all by myself, I decided to fire it up on my PlayStation 1 and see what this game was all about. The first opening sequence really drew me in, and although my tiny adolescent brain couldn't quite comprehend everything that was going on, I was incredibly curious about where this game was about to take me. The contrast to running through the zombie-infested streets of a decaying city to reaching the eerily quiet Raccoon City Police Department had me feeling some type of way. A way that a game had never made me feel before. We all know how video games can be fun, time-consuming, or frustrating, but this was an experience. And for an image of low-res polygons and 2D pre-rendered backgrounds to bring such a sense of immersion was truly mind-blowing for its time. And with RE's many numbered entries, it's safe to say that Capcom has mastered the art of immersion in this series. But what exactly is it that causes a person to lose themselves in a virtual world? Well, in the case of Resident Evil, it's a combination of many things. Let's take for example in the very first RE game, you spend the better half of the story exploring the Spencer Mansion. This mysterious mansion is massive not only in scale, but also its imagination. From spooky corridors to hidden areas, there's no shortage of curiosity while venturing through its many zombie-infested areas. But it's much more than the way things are presented visually. It's the sense of loneliness you feel as you slowly walk through each area. The deafening silence with every step you take, loudly echoing through each hallway. The moans of the living dead and the sounds of the whistling winds outside of the mansion walls. It's all so captivating in an almost therapeutic way. Now let's travel to the fourth entry in the Resident Evil series, which has a much different tone to it. This time we're set in a rural village in Spain, and I'm sure that the development team for RE4 were baffled by Shinji Mikami's choice of this setting, since it seems so far-fetched from the aesthetic of their previous entries. But what Senpai Mikami wants, Senpai Mikami gets. And I'm sure glad they went with it, because to this day, RE4 is praised as a masterpiece in gaming, and I believe a lot of that has to be due to its unmatched atmosphere. Upon the opening cutscene of RE4, we're met with a very gloomy color palette. An ominous fog dances its way through the trees as mystery leads us with every twist and turn of the lonely forest we've been left to find our way out of. The trees without branches, and each building decrepit and filthy. The tone of RE4 is incredible, and truly has a feeling that is one of a kind. But much like we talked about the ambiance of the Spencer Mansion, much of RE4's tone is set by the masterful sound design that's present in each section of the game. From the sounds of rain and thunder to the haunting whispers of the infected villagers, each section carefully crafted to immerse its players, and frankly, it's a world I find myself revisiting very often. When it comes to Resident Evil games, you don't just play them, you experience them. And with each passing entry, we're consistently met with an immersion level that is hard to come by in the world of modern gaming. And that's thanks to the attention to detail of each location the series takes us to. In most RE games, you will find yourself searching through areas for key items in order to progress to the next section of the story. Throughout your search, you will usually find notes or other items that piece together the puzzle of each story you're playing through. This brings a sense of depth to the game that really makes it feel alive and believable to the player. Capcom is also known for their use of fan service in their games, as a way to tie worlds together between entries, making the history and events of each game hold weight and become all the more believable. An example of this is Chris Redfield's jacket being seen in the office of the RPD in Resident Evil 2. Or maybe even the film roll Easter egg from RE2 being used as a DLC costume for Rebecca Chambers in Resident Evil 0. They're constantly tying the worlds of each game together, which is something I really love as a fan of the series. But before I go off on a tangent, let's talk about what I believe to be one of the most important parts of setting the ambiance in any Resident Evil game.
Now let's talk about
save rooms.
Talk about
save rooms.
Please, Mac, I'm dying to talk about
save rooms
with you all day, okay?
Ah, yes, the bliss of a save room, after avoiding 3 lickers, 2 rabid Dobermans, and an oversized houseplant. These rooms are something else, man, and it's really incredible what they've done in terms of immersion with such a simple concept. It's almost like when you play Left 4 Dead, and you reach that part of the map where you can lock the door and re-up your ammo and all that good stuff. But with Resident Evil, you enter this room and essentially let every bit of your stress melt away to the soothing tones of a save room theme. Every theme is different to each game, and it's honestly hard for me to even pick a favorite because they're all so damn good. And in practice, the save rooms make for a very special part of the emotional roller coaster that most RE games are going to put you through. With impressive level, sound, and character design, the Resident Evil series has always supplied us with an ambiance that's unmatched in terms of gaming. There's just a certain feel to each game that's addictive, and a presence that keeps its fans coming back for more, time and time again. Some of the best traits of the Resident Evil series really shines within its ability to suck you into its world. And speaking from personal experience, it's a world you never really want to leave. With most horror games, their only goal is to just scare you with cheap thrills. But with Resident Evil, it's much more than that. It's about building presence and immersing the player every step of the way. And for that reason, I find that to be one of the many secrets to the success of Resident Evil. When it comes to the gaming industry, we've had our fair share of protagonists that have continued to shine bright throughout their many different years of evolution. You've got your Master Chiefs, your Sonic the Hedgehogs, and of course your Solid Snakes. But what about a boulder-punching Mad Lad? Or maybe a leech-manipulating opera singer? Those last two options really piqued your interest, and it's safe to say you're in for a treat. When it comes to the Resident Evil series, there really is no shortage of charm in their wide roster of characters. Some of the most memorable moments of these games can be chalked up to the campy dialogue of certain characters, such as Barry or Leon.
I knew you'd be fine if you landed on your butt.
Or even some of the most tragic moments, such as with Luis Serra in the RE4 remake.
People can change, right?
When it comes to a single-player experience, it's important to have characters that we the players can actually form a bond with. With such a wide array of different characters in each game, you would think it'd be hard to keep up with them all. But as we mentioned before, Capcom has a knack for attention to detail, and in these details, we'll find ourselves becoming all too familiar with our main characters. Throughout the history of action gaming, we've been spoiled with a litany of beautiful and equally badass female protagonists, and it's safe to say the Resident Evil series is no exception to that practice. Shinji Mikami, the creator of Resident Evil, is actually a huge fan of strong female leads in his games, and he backed this up with a 2014 interview with Nintendo Life saying, "I don't know if I put more emphasis on women characters, but when I do introduce them, it's never as objects. In some games they will be peripheral characters with ridiculous breast physics. I avoid that sort of obvious eroticism. I also don't like female characters who are submissive to male characters, or to the situation they're in. I won't portray women in that way. I write women characters who discover their interdependence as the game progresses, or who already know they are independent but have tested against a series of challenges. And this outlook on character creation in the RE series really shines bright in the amount of depth we see in each character. You take for example Jill Valentine. Jill is a character that has continued to evolve throughout the series, ever since its birth. But from what started as a simple search and rescue mission for her, turned into uncovering a government conspiracy and basically being at ground zero of the T-virus outbreak. Then amidst Jill barely surviving the events of the first game, she makes plans to skip town and commit her life to exposing the corruption of the Umbrella Corporation. Well, it looks like they're on to her, because they sent this absolute unit to chase her all around the city. But have no fear, just hold my beer. And she also becomes a full-blooded killing machine controlled by Wesker at some point. But that's another long-winded tangent, and I don't want to spoil too much if you haven't already played through the series. But what I'm getting at is this is only one of the many main characters throughout the Resident Evil universe. And although Miss Valentine may be my personal favorite, she's not the only character with a gripping backstory and impressive evolution. You've also got Chris Redfield, his sister Claire, Leon, Barry, Rebecca, Billy, Wesker, I mean, the list goes on. And even the bad guys will pull at your heartstrings from time to time. There's a sense of humanity in the Resident Evil series that is hardly seen in gaming. They're not afraid to shine light on government corruption and the fact that our best interest is not always in mind when it comes to greed and power. Resident Evil builds on that and presents itself in the characters with countless acts of heroism and sometimes sacrifice. The protagonists of each game are willing to risk their lives time and time again to essentially save the world, while the antagonists are so lost in the sauce they'll usually do anything to gain the ultimate power. It's a tale as old as day, but it's one that's spun in such a beautifully woven web you'll never want to leave. When it comes to the greatest games of all time, you can usually attribute these games with having a strong lead, and with characters as great as those in the RE universe, it's no surprise why we keep coming back for more. When it comes to creating great media, there's a formula that should be applied in order to receive the best result. When it comes to movies, gaming, or even literature, it's often found that the storylines that carry a healthy balance of emotions within them will usually stand out the most. And for some media, that can be a make it or break it decision. I may be biased in this, but I'm going to go ahead and elaborate on something real quick, so hear me out. Scream is the best horror movie of all time. What? Now, you're probably wondering why I'm talking about this. But like I said, just hear me out. Although it's obviously just my opinion that Scream is the greatest horror movie to ever grace our TV screens, I and many other fans of the series will agree on that for one reason. It's not because the plot is super in-depth, it's not because of its insanely well done CGI, it's not even because of all the twists and turns within the story. It's solely because Scream is a film that captures every range of emotion within it. It really takes its audience for a ride.
How do you gut someone?
We've got horror, we've got drama, and we've even got some romance. And what's the cherry on top of all that? We've got comedy. Now, this is a risky formula when it comes to making movies or games, but when it's done right, I believe it's a recipe that will always keep its fan base coming back for more. And with the Scream franchise gaining over 700 million since its birth, I think a lot of other people see where I'm coming from with this. Now back to our main topic of Resident Evil. How does this formula apply in their games? Looking back on the very beginning of the series, we were met with some seriously campy dialogue as well as some pretty goofy delivery.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
There was also plenty of suspense, drama, and of course action to sprinkle throughout the story, and this is what started it all. Ever since its creation, Resident Evil has always made the choice of including a healthy balance of emotion throughout their storylines. You'll have some moments where you're terrified and others where you're relieved. Sometimes you'll catch yourself chuckling at goofy dialogue, and other moments you're maybe even fighting tears. The atmosphere in Resident Evil, while differing from game to game, does keep a consistent formula. And that formula is what I believe plays an important role in giving such a great experience for its player base. But don't just take my word for it. If you're new to the series or haven't played the majority of the games, just know you're missing out on a great experience with each entry. And with Resident Evil 6 being a bit of an exception. Now we've covered a lot on the look and feel of these games, as well as the characters that make them so great. But what about how the games are played? Well, that's another reason why the Resident Evil series is so successful. Not only are the games fun and engaging, but they've also managed to consistently change the way they're being played, all the while staying true to their atmosphere and lore. With the release of the first 3 Resident Evil titles, these games were known for their use of the third-person fixed camera angle. This was a method that was used to not only engage the player in a suspenseful gaming experience, but also allowed for them to allocate the majority of their resources on the polygons of characters and enemies. With the majority of the 3D rendering being used on character models, they opted for 2D rendered backgrounds with great detail to give their worlds an extra pop on pre-2000s hardware. This style then graduated to a more mature and dynamic camera angle with the release of Resident Evil Code Veronica, which made use of a dynamic camera and fully rendered 3D environments. This new camera trick was then used in the following Resident Evil remake on the GameCube and also Resident Evil Zero. After mastering the use of fixed camera angles in their games, they opted to change things up and take advantage of the powerful hardware in the next-gen consoles. With their next entry of Resident Evil 4, they decided to change things up and start using the over-the-shoulder perspective, which at the time was a brand new mechanic in gaming. The process of development for Resident Evil 4 had a rough start to say the least, and with Shinji Mikami having something to prove with this game, he actually opted for this type of angle simply because he thought it worked better. And obviously, he was correct in that. They had unintentionally struck gold in the world of third-person shooters with this mechanic, and it's now become a staple in the way that third-person shooters play, even to this day. Now cut to 12 years later, we were blessed with the first-person perspective of Resident Evil 7, and more recently, RE Village. Both games bringing the Resident Evil series in a direction that no fan ever saw coming, but they all surprisingly embraced it. You see, when developers make changes to a franchise in such a drastic way such as Capcom has, it's usually not met with the most welcoming of arms, especially among its fan base. People hate change, but realistically, we need change in our favorite IPs so they never get old to us. And with Capcom knowing that, they've taken many different leaps through the history of RE, and have seemed to somehow hit a home run almost every time. RE7 and Village were both met with critical acclaim, and as a fan myself, I had to admit that I was skeptical how these games were going to pan out. Because of Capcom's relentless ambition and desire for evolution that they've continued to please their OG fans as well as gain new ones. They aim to please both the old and new school of gamer, and it's hard to pick a company that does a better job these days. We all know the struggle that's found in modern day gaming, but despite all adversity in the gaming industry, Resident Evil continues to shine bright to this day, and for good reason. Only time will tell what Capcom may have up their sleeve for the next RE game, but for the time being, I'll be happy to revisit all their older entries a couple more times while I wait. In a sea of unfinished games and microtransactions, it's really a breath of fresh air to know that real video games are still existing to this day. There's not a doubt in my mind that the Resident Evil series still has a lot of fuel left in its tank. If you haven't played all the mainline games yet, I hope this video inclined you to do so, because you're really missing out on a great series. But for now, that's pretty much it. Some of my honest opinions on why I think Resident Evil is such a beloved series. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Before we go, I just want to thank everybody that showed so much love and support to my last video. Honestly, that was the best reception I've ever gotten on any content I've created on YouTube, so it was just incredible to see so much support. And everybody that's new to the channel, I just want to thank you guys. Hopefully we can keep this train rolling. Also, comment down below the first Resident Evil game you played. I'm curious to know which one it was. Until next time, my name is Vincent. Hope to see you in the next video. Peace.
Heaven sent.